My wife thought I was a failed writer. She didn't whisper it. She said it with a glass in her hand, a smile sharp enough to cut, and an audience ready to laugh. The night Linda laughed with her brother about my pathetic writer's life, I realized the best chapter of my story hadn't even been written yet. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. Boston, Thanksgiving night, Thursday, November 28th, 2019. The city outside was gripped by winter's first bite. Frost clung to the iron railings, and the brownstones along Marlborough Street glowed faintly under the street lamps. Inside our dining room, heat poured from the oven, and rosemary scented the air. I carried out the 20-pound turkey, golden skin crackling under the knife. The oven timer dinged as I set it down, a clean little bell that should have meant celebration, not the start of humiliation. Linda raised her glass. Her smile was the kind she saved for strangers and guests, soft, polite, almost charming. To gratitude, she said, and for a second I thought maybe she set keep it simple. But then came the sting. Justin still thinks he sets Hemingway. The table erupted in laughter. My brother-in-law Tom smirked, never one to miss a chance to jab. Maybe let real men handle the money, he added. I pressed the carving knife against the maple board, steadying it with 2 fingers. I had been mocked before in classrooms, in faculty lounges, in rejection letters that came back with a single sentence, "Not for us." But when it comes from your wife in front of her family, it lands like a stone in your chest. The neighbor, new to the building, invited out of courtesy, tried to lighten the mood. They mentioned the leaves along the Charles, the way the river glowed red in autumn. Linda nodded politely, and then her mother Evelyn dragged us all back where she wanted the conversation. Security. Interest rates are low, she said, stabbing a green bean. If things don't work out, at least the house stays in the family. She meant Linda. She meant not me. The house. A 19th century brownstone we'd bought in 2003. Every brick of it felt like my retirement, my legacy. When I left teaching, people thought I was chasing smoke. I sold my guitar, the one I used to strum for students on Friday afternoons, just to afford Linda's wedding ring. I thought I was investing in a life together. But in that dining room it was clear they didn't see the house as ours. They saw it as theirs, waiting to be taken. Linda leaned toward Tom while I poured gravy. If he had anything, he'd have shown it by now, she whispered, loud enough for Evelyn to nod along. Betrayal doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's quiet. The click of a purse zipper. I saw Linda slide a folded slip inside, her thumb covering the logo, her fingers too careful. A hotel receipt. The corner flashed with a number in blue ink, 8,200, circled twice. She glanced at me, then away like a thief pocketing candy. I didn't know the date. I didn't know the story. I only knew the number, and the way she hid it told me it mattered. Through dinner she kept up the facade, offering seconds, complimenting the cranberry sauce, laughing too brightly at Tom's smug jokes. To anyone else, she looked like the perfect hostess. But every time her eyes cut toward me, the smile faltered. Contempt hides in the smallest cracks. When Tom stood for more wine and Evelyn excused herself, Linda gathered plates as she brushed past me. She whispered without moving her lips. Smile. The word was soft, rehearsed, and cruel. The neighbor helped me at the sink, drying platters in silence. Their eyes lingered a moment too long, not pitying, but recording. A silent witness. Later, when everything mattered, I would remember that gaze. After pie, after coffee, after the ritual of, "No, you keep the leftovers." The house emptied, coats slid from hooks, scarves wrapped. The door breathed shut. Tom lingered, of course. He always lingered when there was blood in the water. He stood with Linda in the doorway of my study, voices hushed but carrying just far enough. "If he sets hiding anything," Linda said, her tone sugar with poison underneath, "you set'll find it. The house will be mine. Mine, not ours, mine." I didn't storm in. I didn't shout. I learned long ago that some wars are won by silence. I sat at my desk instead and pulled open a drawer. Inside were scraps of my life. A dry cleaning ticket from a night I had to look respectable. A bookstore receipt where I'd underlined the date because the novel I bought gave me the courage to keep writing. I added a new scrap, a sticky note with the number 8200 circled and a single word beneath hotel. Later, I would match it to a Ritz-Carlton folio dated December 14th, 2020, with a name on the reservation that wasn't mine. But that night, all I had was a number and the sudden cold knowledge that Linda's contempt was no longer private. Before bed, I checked the deadbolt like always. It stuck. Just a little, like a key that didn't belong, had been tested. A faint bright thread scratched the keyhole. I took a photo, no flash. Evidence is boring until it saves you. In bed, Linda scrolled her phone, blue light cutting across her face. Good dinner, she said. Evelyn liked the cranberry. Good, I said. Tom thinks we should refinance. Rates are low. Maybe, I said, and rolled away so she couldn't see my eyes were still open. The opposite of love isn't hate. It's contempt, the shrug, the joke at your expense, the way we becomes I when they speak about the future. That night, I felt it like a draft under the door. At midnight, I got up again. Linda's purse gaped slightly on the chaise, black leather shining. I didn't touch it, I didn't need to, I had seen enough. Back in the study, I slipped the sticky note beneath a folder labeled House. Inside were photocopies of the deed, mortgage statements, a single handwritten line. If they tell you what you are, believe them but keep the receipts. I added the photo of the deadbolt, dated it November 28th, 2019. They think I broke, I whispered, the words tasting bitter and sweet all at once. Let them. Outside, wind scraped the windows with bare branches like pens testing their ink. Somewhere down the block, a plow blade echoed against the asphalt. The house creaked, old timbers shifting. I closed my eyes and saw the number again. 8200 circled, proof. The first torn page in a book I hadn't finished. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the next chapter. The house was quiet, but my head wasn't set. Boston, December 3rd, 2019. Less than a week after Thanksgiving. The turkey bones were gone, the dishes washed. But the taste of humiliation lingered. Nights had become my enemy. I would sit in the study long after Linda drifted to sleep, the glow of her phone screen still ghosting her face in my memory. I kept a glass of whiskey at my elbow, not to drink it down, but to watch the way the amber light caught the cut of the glass. Sometimes I lined them up like soldiers across the desk, proof that I was still awake, proof that I couldn't rest in my own home. The study floor was scattered with rejection letters. I had saved them all, little white tombstones of ambition, from 2005 through 2010. I could almost measure my worth by the pile. Not what we're looking for. We wish you the best elsewhere. Some had never been opened, just torn halfway across the envelope where I didn't have the strength to finish reading. On the desk lay a single page that didn't fit with the rest, a HarperCollins royalty statement, J.D. Rowan. My name that wasn't a name, $3.1 million listed in neat black ink, filtered through the LLC. I had set up quietly, carefully. They thought I was broke. They thought I was clinging to a dream, but every page they mocked had turned into bricks of money they couldn't see. I stared at that statement and remembered another night, years earlier before Linda's contempt hardened into something permanent. I had pawned my guitar, the one I played at college gigs and in quiet corners of bars, just to afford her wedding ring. The pawn slip had felt heavier in my pocket than the ring box in my hand. I thought sacrifice meant love. I thought she saw it too. Now I found a different slip of paper in her purse. $8,200 at the Ritz-Carlton. Hotel bills, whispers to Tom. Refinancing talk. The sacrifices I made had turned into debts she pretended to carry. I poured whiskey. I didn't drink. I just poured and set the glass down, the way some people stack chips at a poker table. The fridge hummed in the kitchen. Ordinary, steady, yet it mocked me. A sound too normal, too indifferent to the storm inside me. Every hum felt like a taunt. You're nothing, you're stuck. You'll always be this. Sometimes I caught myself muttering aloud, you want the house? You want the name? You want me gone? The walls didn't answer. The whiskey didn't answer. But silence has a way of pressing its own verdict. I opened a drawer and pulled out the divorce drafts I had found in Linda's bag. Tom had printed them, his font, his formatting. On page 3, in section 4B, it read, Unrealized royalties, subject to equal distribution. My chest tightened. Unrealized. They suspected, but they didn't know. Yet here it was in black and white, my secret life reduced to a line item they thought they could carve out of me. I gripped the paper until my knuckles whitened. Rage trembled in my hands. Every insult was a page torn from me. I whispered to the empty study. I nearly stopped writing altogether. The truth was, I had stopped for a time. There were months in 2011 where I didn't write a single word. Linda would come into the room, see the blank page, and laugh softly. The kind of laugh that doesn't need a punchline. Still at it, she'd say. You've never finished anything in your life. Nitsabetchi, and I said I'd believe her. But then came the first check, then the second, then the numbers that added commas to my life. And I knew it wasn't failure she hated. It was the idea that one day I might not be hers to mock. That night I stayed awake until the cold light of dawn bled through the curtains. I looked at the row of whiskey glasses, the pile of rejection letters, the royalty statement on top. I thought of all the years I had given this house, this family, this woman, teaching, writing, sacrificing. And all it had earned me was a dinner table of laughter and a whispered promise that she would take everything. I leaned back, pressed my hand to my chest, and listened to the silence. The hum of the fridge, the creak of the floorboards, the sound of my own breathing. Every noise felt like an accusation. Every shadow felt like a verdict. I realized something that chilled me more than any November wind. It wasn't Linda's betrayal that was killing me. It was the collapse of believing I had a home. My own house had turned into a courtroom, and every night was a trial where I was the defendant and contempt was the jury. The whiskey stayed untouched. The royalty statement stayed in the drawer, and I stayed in the chair, sleepless in my own house, waiting for the next page of this nightmare to turn. December 12th, 2019. Boston nights were long, the kind of cold that made the Charles River look like a mirror of steel. I sat at a dim bar on Boylston Street, the kind of place where the jukebox still swallowed quarters and the bartender didn't bother to ask if you wanted another. My old college roommate, Ethan, sat across from me, his lawyer's eyes scanning every crease in my face the way a detective scans a crime scene. I slid a manila folder across the table. Inside, HarperCollins royalty statements, wire transfers into my LLC account, and contracts with my pen name, J.D. Rowan. Ethan pulled out the top page and let out a low whistle. 3.1 million. He looked up. You weren't set kidding. I never kid about words, I said, my throat tight. They think I sippin' broke. They think I sippin' wasted 20 years. He set the papers back in the folder and closed it with both hands. Then we don't sit strike yet. We build. You've got proof, Justin, but proof without timing is nothing. We still need the right filings, the right witnesses, and patience. Patience. The word burned. I had been patient all my life. Waiting for editors, waiting for reviews, waiting for Linda to see me as more than a failure. But now patience was not about acceptance. It was about strategy. Back home, I started constructing masks. I left fake drafts lying around, manuscripts with broken sentences and red ink slashed across the margins. Bills stacked on the desk, utilities, small credit card charges. Even an overdue notice I deliberately left unopened. I wanted Linda to see chaos. I wanted her contempt to grow fat and arrogant, so when the truth finally landed, it would break her. She walked into the study one evening, saw the pile, and smirked. Still at it? You said never finished anything in your life. The words should have cut. Instead, I let them stand. Every insult was mortar on the wall I was building. I had a small digital recorder hidden behind the row of whiskey glasses. That night, it captured her voice on the phone with Tom. Don't that worry. He sign whatever I put in front of him. I replayed it later in the dark, the click of her lighter punctuating her arrogance. Proof. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just her own voice condemning her. Lisa, my sister, called around that time. You sound tired, she said, her voice always sharper than she knew. I nearly told her everything. Nearly, but secrets are fragile things. Reveal them too early, and they vanish. Instead, I told her I was revising a draft. That wasn't a lie. Every day I revised a story, not just on the page, but in my life. I was writing a double life, one they could see, broken and unfinished, and one they couldn't, solid and waiting. At night, I kept meticulous notes. The $8,200 hotel bill, copied and filed. The divorce draft, scanned and labeled. The deadbolt photo, printed with the date. Each page slipped into a binder marked simply evidence. It wasn't about paranoia, it was about authorship. This was my story now, and every betrayal was a footnote that would find its place in the final draft. Linda became careless. She bragged to Tom in the kitchen, her voice carrying down the hall. He has no idea. The house will be in my name by summer. She bragged to her mother over coffee. He'll roll over like always. It's who he is. She bragged to herself in the mirror, practicing a smile that looked more like victory than joy. I said nothing. I cooked dinners, I graded papers from the small tutoring jobs I picked up. I played the role of the defeated husband, the failed writer, and every time she laughed at me, I wrote another paragraph in my mind. They thought I was cornered, they thought I was blind. But the truth was simpler, colder, and far more dangerous. I was already writing their ending. Christmas lights twinkled along Newbury Street, but inside my house the air was colder than the December wind. By then Linda had become bold, too bold. She spoke to people as if she already owned everything. The house, the money, even me. And the arrogance was my alibi. December 22nd, 2019. I came home to find a realtor's business card on the kitchen counter. Linda twirled it between her fingers like a prize. I was just exploring options, she said, her tone sweet enough to rot teeth. Options? I asked, placing my keys in the dish by the door. She smiled without meeting my eyes. For when I finally get this place to myself, it's SUP's worth over $2 million now, you know. Tom says it's SUP's a seller, SUP's market. I nodded, biting down so hard I tasted copper. She thought she was dangling bait, but I wasn't the fish. What she didn't realize was that she couldn't sell a single brick without my signature. That night I called Ethan. We met in his office, a small suite near Copley Square lined with law books that smelled faintly of dust and leather. I slid the realtor's card across his desk. She seems already moving, I said. Ethan leaned back, steepling his fingers. Good, the more she overreaches, the better for us. I said I'll start the paperwork. First step, freezing accounts linked to royalties. She can set touch what she can set prove exists. The next day, I walked into a downtown branch of First Boston Bank. I sat across from the manager, a man with a gold pen and a nervous smile. I'd like to restructure access to the Rowan LLC accounts, I said. He tapped a few keys, nodded, and within 30 minutes every dollar Linda thought she'd someday claim was locked tighter than the vault beneath us. I left with copies of the updated documents. Stamped, dated, notarized. Another page in the binder. Another line in the story. Christmas Eve. Our dining room table glittered with china and crystal, the kind of spread Linda adored. Evelyn sat at the head, Tom at her right, wine glass in hand as though he were king of the feast. Linda tapped her glass with a spoon. That sound, sharp, ringing, performative, made my shoulders stiffen. Next year, she said with a laugh, all this will be mine. Tom raised his glass. Evelyn nodded proudly. The neighbor sat quietly again, present but silent, eyes sharp. I didn't argue. I didn't protest. I cut my roast beef and let the juice spill across the plate, and in my head I wrote the line that would one day end this chapter. Her arrogance was my alibi. Every boast, another paragraph for my draft. After dinner, while Linda poured wine for her mother, I walked to the study and pulled out the recorder. That evening it captured Tom Sips's voice. Use Sal, get him to sign, Linda. He said, spineless. Spineless. I rewound the tape twice, just to hear it again. I left the recorder running the next morning when Linda called the realtor. He won't fight me, she said. He never does. Proof again. Proof layered like chapters, each building toward the climax. On December 28th, Lisa stopped by. My sister has always had an instinct for storms. She glanced at the tension in the air, the stiff smile on Linda's face, and knew something was wrong. She helped me box books from the study, a polite excuse to linger. As she stacked them, a draft slipped free from a folder, a manuscript with Linda's handwriting across the title page. Co-author Linda Miller. My chest tightened. She wasn't satisfied with my money. She wanted my name, my story. Lisa looked at me, confusion hardening into anger. She sips claiming this? I nodded once. That night, I copied the page and filed it into the binder. Under the word evidence, I wrote in bold pen, identity theft attempt, manuscript draft. The mask Linda wore for the world grew thinner by the day. She bragged at Christmas parties to friends. I'll be the one making decisions next year. She whispered to Tom about offers from realtors. She even practiced signing her name on papers in the kitchen, thinking I wasn't watching. But I was watching. Always watching, and every moment of arrogance, every slip of the tongue, every scrap of paper became another paragraph in the novel of her downfall. Ethan and I met again just before New Year's Eve. His office was dark except for the green glow of a banker's lamp. I handed him the co-author draft copy. He read it, jaw tightening. She sips not just after money, Justin. She sips after authorship. That changes everything. If she tries to present this, it sips fraud, and fraud we can nail. I exhaled slowly, then let her keep talking. I smiled faintly. Patience, my friend. You've written long novels before. This one just happens to be lived instead of printed. When I left his office, snow had begun to fall. Thin, silent flakes that softened the city. I tilted my face up, breathing in the cold, and whispered to myself, pages of deception. Because that's what they were. Every lie Linda told, every boast Tom made, every scheme Evelyn whispered, they weren't victories, they were pages. And I was the author. January 3rd, 2020. Boston was frozen, streets rimmed with salt, cars coughing white steam into the air. Inside, the house was warm, not from love, but from the heat. Linda cranked as if comfort could hide the chill between us. I woke to the sound of her laughing on the phone, her voice sharp with victory. Yes, of course, she was saying. Book the full package. He won, let's question it. Later, when she left her purse on the table, I slid the spa folio out. $2,800. December 28th, 2020. Signature Linda Miller, paid in full. I copied it, slipped the copy into the binder, and returned the original as if untouched. Another receipt, another page. That night I sat in the study, staring at the growing binder. Hotel bill, divorce draft, realtor's card, co-author page, spa receipt. Each artifact felt like ammunition, like the chapters of a novel that was writing itself through their greed. But the spa receipt struck me harder than the others. Not for the money, though $2,800 could pay a month's mortgage. It was the arrogance in it. She didn't care about discretion anymore. She assumed I was blind, powerless, irrelevant, and arrogance has a price. Lisa came by again that week. She carried a box of old papers from our parents' sipped at attic, yellowed report cards, family photos, letters, and faded envelopes. As we sorted them in the study, she noticed the binder. Justin, she said quietly, what is all this? I hesitated. Then I opened it. She turned the pages slowly. The $8,200 hotel bill, the draft with Linda's forged co-author credit, the spa receipt. When she reached the divorce draft, she froze. Her voice shook. She sips trying to strip you of everything. Not just the house, your work, your name. I nodded. They weren't satisfied with my money. They wanted my identity, my story. Lisa pressed her hand over mine. Then don't let them win. You've always written your way out of dark places. This time is no different. Her words steadied me. I remembered nights in 1994 when I first confessed to her that I wanted to write novels. She had been the only one who didn't laugh. She was the one who mailed me a fountain pen with a note. Write until the ink runs out. Then buy another. Now, decades later, she was still the one reminding me who I was. Linda's arrogance only grew. At a New Year's dinner with friends, she bragged openly. By next Christmas, I'll be hosting in my house, my name on the papers. Her friends laughed politely. some uncomfortably. I caught the neighbor's eyes across the table again. Not mocking, not laughing, just watching, recording. After everyone left, Linda leaned against the counter, sipping wine. You should have finished something by now, she said, her voice thick with drink. A real man doesn't waste decades chasing pipe dreams. I didn't answer. I simply noted the date, time, and her exact words in a journal I had started. Beside the entry, I taped a copy of the spa receipt. Because her arrogance wasn't random anymore. It was a pattern, a strategy. She wanted me small, and every time she stepped on me, she gave me another piece of evidence. Mid-January, Tom visited again. He stood in the study, flipping through my fake drafts, chuckling. Unfinished, as always. He slapped me on the back. When Linda takes control, she'll clean this mess up. I smiled thinly. Maybe she will. That night, I replayed the recorder. Tom's voice, when Linda takes control. Another line for the binder. Another paragraph for my mental draft. Ethan called me a few days later. I reviewed the spa receipt. We'll keep it on file. It's not about the money, Justin. It's about the pattern of spending, entitlement, and fraud. Courts don't set like arrogance. Judges see right through it. I leaned back in my chair, the phone warm against my ear. That's the price of arrogance, Ethan. They think it buys them comfort. But it's buying me freedom. February crept in with icy mornings. Linda Sepp's schemes multiplied. She met with another realtor. I found the card tucked in her wallet. She opened new store accounts, charging luxury goods in her name. She told Evelyn over tea. He Sepp's weak, always has been. By summer the deed will be mine. I copied every detail, every bill, every statement. My binder grew thicker, heavier, like a manuscript approaching its climax. One night, I dreamed of pages, endless pages flying across the room, each with Linda's handwriting trying to erase my own. I woke sweating, sat at my desk, and wrote a single line in my journal. They think they're editing my story. They don't realize I'm the author. By March, the house felt less like a home and more like a stage. Linda rehearsed her victory lines in every room, while I sat quietly recording the script. The silence between us was no longer painful. It was purposeful. A winter silence, patient, waiting for the thaw. The spa receipt, the co-authored draft, the realtor's boasts, all of it was arrogance layered like bricks. And the heavier they built their wall, the harder it would crumble when I pushed. They wanted my money. They wanted my name. But in chasing both, they were writing themselves into the story of their own downfall. January 2021. Boston was buried under snow, the kind that muffles everything, car horns, footsteps, even breath. The city seemed wrapped in silence, and in that silence I found my weapon. I moved into a modest hotel room near Kenmore Square. Nothing fancy, beige curtains, a humming radiator, a view of a Dunkin' parking lot. But it gave me space. Space away from Linda's laughter echoing in the halls of the house I had paid for. She stayed behind, throwing parties, inviting Tom and Evelyn, filling the rooms with noise and wine as if they already owned the deed. I sat in the hotel at night, headphones on, listening to recordings. Linda's lighter clicking. Tom's smug laugh. The word spineless repeated like a chorus. I didn't rage. I didn't cry. I listened over and over until their arrogance hardened into evidence. Revenge wasn't a fury, I whispered to the empty room. It was silence that grew teeth. The snow outside became a metaphor I couldn't ignore. Each flake fell quietly, insignificant on its own, but together they buried the city. That was me. Quiet, patient, relentless, waiting for the thaw. One evening I returned to the brownstone to collect mail. The house blazed with light. Laughter spilled from the dining room. Through the crack of the door, I saw Linda raising her glass. By summer, she said, "This will be mine." Her friends cheered, clinking glasses. I stepped back into the cold before anyone saw me. Snow crunched beneath my boots, the sound sharp and clean. I took out my phone and recorded a voice memo. January 23rd, 2021. Linda brags publicly. By summer, this will be mine. Witnesses 4 friends. Setting dining room, Marlborough Street. Another entry for the binder. The binder had become a novel in itself. Hotel bill, spa receipt, divorce draft. Realtor's cards, co-author page. Bank statements. Each page marked, dated, indexed. Ethan once told me, judges hate sloppiness. A clean record wins. So I became an archivist of betrayal. Lisa visited me at the hotel one icy afternoon. She carried soup in a thermos, her breath clouding in the air as she walked down the hallway. "You look thin," she said, setting the thermos on the desk. "I'm fine," I lied. She opened the binder, flipping through the evidence. "This is airtight, Justin. But you can live like this forever." "I set man not," I said, my voice low. "I set man waiting." She studied me for a long moment. "You've always been patient, but patience can turn into self-destruction if you've are not careful." I smiled faintly. "Not this time. This time patience is my blade." At night the silence grew heavier. The radiator hissed. The wind rattled the window pane. I wrote in my journal, "Silence is not absence. Silence is strategy." Meanwhile, Linda flaunted her control. She changed locks on the back door, thinking I wouldn't notice. I did. I photographed the new keyhole, dated it February 4th, 2021, and filed it. She hosted a planning dinner with Tom and Evelyn. A neighbor later told me she overheard Linda laughing. "He'll be gone by April." I logged that too. Every boast, every slip, every act of arrogance was no longer an insult. It was a contribution. They were writing themselves into the indictment, and I was merely collecting their drafts. Ethan and I met at a cafe on Boylston, snow tracked in by boots around us. He sipped his black coffee, leaned close. "It's SEPs coming together, Justin. By spring we said I'll have the case tight enough to crush them." "Good," I said. "Let them keep talking. Let them keep laughing." Ethan nodded. "Silence is working in your favor. They think you surrendered. That Sib's the greatest trap of all." As winter deepened, I embraced the quiet. The hotel became my cocoon. I wrote under J.D. Rowan's name at night, drafts stacking beside the binder. My double life sharpened by day the failed husband they mocked, by night the author they could never touch. The snow kept falling. Every morning I walked the frozen sidewalks, breath fogging the air, and repeated to myself, "Patience is justice wearing a cloak." In February, Linda made her boldest move yet. She called a contractor to discuss renovations. "When it's mine," she said, not realizing I was in the next room, retrieving boxes of old manuscripts. Her voice carried down the hall, confident, careless. I recorded the entire conversation on my phone. When she left, I copied the file to a USB drive, labeled it, and slipped it into the binder. Another chapter secured. The irony wasn't lost on me. She thought I was spineless. She thought silence meant defeat. But silence was where I gathered strength. By March, Boston thawed slightly. Slush lined the gutters, ice cracked underfoot. Linda's arrogance grew louder, but so did my binder. The hotel room, the evidence, the silence. It all pointed toward one inevitable spring. And in that silence, I smiled for the first time in months. Because winter had taught me this: patience isn't weakness. It's power, waiting for the right moment to speak. April 14th, 2022, Boston Superior Court. The walls were paneled in oak, the kind that smells of history and judgment. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, slicing across the rows of benches where strangers shifted and murmured. The silence between those murmurs felt alive, as if the whole room was holding its breath. I sat at the defendant's table, hands folded, binder in front of me. Ethan sat to my right, calm as always, tie perfectly knotted, eyes steady. Across the aisle, Linda beamed. She wore a navy dress, pearls at her neck, the posture of someone certain the gavel had already fallen in her favor. Tom sat behind her, whispering occasionally, a smirk tugging at his lips. Evelyn clutched her purse, eyes hard and satisfied. In the gallery, almost hidden near the back, sat the neighbor. The same neighbor who had watched me cut turkey in silence on Thanksgiving night, who had seen my humiliation without comment. Now they watched again, their eyes sharp, a witness to both my fall and what was about to come. The judge entered. Everyone rose. The bailiff Sepp's voice rang out, "All rise." Then the gavel struck wood. Court is now in session. Linda's attorney stood first, a tall man with a rehearsed swagger. "Your Honor," he began, "this is a case about a failed husband who squandered his family's future on pipe dreams. My client supported him for years while he chased fantasies of being a writer. He never finished anything, never contributed meaningfully. The house, the assets, they rightfully belong with her, the one who kept this family afloat." He turned and gestured toward me, voice dripping with contempt. "Justin Miller is an unemployed failed writer who never finishes anything." The words hit like a hammer. The same insult Linda had repeated for decades, now dressed in legal robes. I felt my chest tighten, my palms sweat. For a second it was 2011 again. Rejection letters scattered at my feet. Linda's laugh in the doorway. But then Ethan's hand pressed lightly on my arm. "Steady," he whispered. I breathed. The silence inside me hardened into steel. The attorney continued, parading documents, bank statements of household expenses, Linda's testimony that she had paid for everything of substance, Tom's spreadsheets showing unrealized royalties that he claimed must be marital assets. Each sheet fluttered like a dagger meant to pin me to the table. Finally, it was our turn. Ethan rose, calm and deliberate. He slid the binder onto the podium and opened it with a soft thud. "Your Honor," he said, "this is not a case about a failed husband. This is a case about deception, arrogance, and a conspiracy to defraud." He pulled out the first exhibit, the $8,200 hotel bill. He handed it to the clerk, who passed it to the judge. This, dated December 14th, 2020, was paid in full by Mrs. Miller. Not for a family vacation, not for any marital purpose, for herself and another party not named Justin Miller. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Linda's smile flickered. Exhibit 2, the $2,800 SPAR receipt. January 3rd, 2020. Again, Mrs. Miller using marital funds for personal indulgence while accusing my client of waste. Exhibit 3, the co-author draft with Linda Sepp's handwriting. Here we see Mrs. Miller attempting to insert herself as co-author on a manuscript she never wrote. A clear attempt at fraud and theft of intellectual property. The judge's eyebrows lifted. Tom shifted uncomfortably. Evelyn looked down at her purse. Then came the recording. Ethan pressed play. Linda's voice filled the courtroom, clear and smug. "Don't worry, he'll sign whatever I put in front of him." The sound echoed like a gunshot. Gasps broke the silence. The judge leaned forward. Linda's face drained of color. Ethan let the silence hang before speaking again. "And finally, Your Honor, the truth they never expected to face." He pulled out the HarperCollins royalty statements, the contracts, the bank deposits under J.D. Rowan. He laid them out in a neat stack, each page stamped, dated, notarized. "My client, Justin Miller, is not a failed writer. He is J.D. Rowan, a best-selling author with over 2.2 million books sold worldwide. The royalties total $3.1 million, secured under an LLC long before Mrs. Miller's schemes began. These funds are not speculative. They are real, they are documented, and they are his." The courtroom erupted. Whispers hissed like wind through trees. The neighbor sat upright, eyes wide, nodding slowly as if confirming what they had suspected all along. Linda Sepp's attorney stammered, "Objection, this is irrelevant." "Overruled," the judge snapped. "Proceed." Ethan turned to Linda, his voice cutting. "You mocked him for years, Mrs. Miller. You called him a failure. You conspired with your brother to steal his home, his name, his work. But today you see the truth. He finished more than you ever dreamed possible." Linda's lips trembled. Tom's smirk vanished. Evelyn pressed her hand to her forehead, suddenly fragile. I sat there, silent, letting the storm rage around me. For 18 years Linda had written me off. That day I wrote her out. The judge looked at me directly. "Mr. Miller, do you have anything you wish to say?" I rose slowly, my legs steady, my voice clear. "Your Honor, for years I believed silence was weakness. I let them laugh, insult, and humiliate me. But silence is not weakness. Silence is patience, and patience has teeth. Every receipt, every insult, every whisper through the wall, I kept them. Not out of spite, but out of truth. They thought I was a failed writer, but the truth is, I was writing all along. In this, I gestured to the courtroom. The binder, the faces paling across the aisle. This is my finished chapter. The room went still. The only sound was the Judge Sip's pen scratching across the page. Then the gavel struck. We will recess for 1 hour. Testimony to continue after review of exhibits. Linda collapsed back in her chair. Eyes vacant, Tom whispered furiously, but his voice was drowned by the murmurs spreading through the courtroom. The neighbor leaned forward, eyes locked on me, a faint nod of respect passing between us. I sat down, exhaled, and closed the binder with a final, deliberate snap. The silence afterward was not heavy anymore. It was victory waiting to be sealed. Boston, April 2022. The courtroom may have adjourned, but the echo of that gavel followed us out into the city like a funeral bell. For Linda, Tom, and Evelyn, it was exactly that, the death of their illusions. The first cracks showed the very next morning. I walked into a cafe on Boylston, binder under my arm, just to breathe air that didn't taste of oak-paneled judgment. Whispers stirred the moment I entered. Two women at the counter leaned toward each other, voices lowered but not enough. That's him, the writer. Their eyes flicked toward me, then away, as if staring too long might set their own lives on fire. Linda had built a reputation in Boston's social circles, charity committees, garden clubs, wine tastings. She loved the stage, the admiration, the illusion that she was the anchor of our family. But when masks shatter, people don't pick up the pieces for you. They step around them, careful not to cut themselves. By the end of that week, her phone stopped ringing. The same women who once toasted her strength now avoided her calls. Her lunch dates canceled. Her invitations returned politely unanswered. Boston is a small city with a long memory, and humiliation spreads faster than gossip. Tom fared no better. Word of his collusion, the recordings, the subpoenas, the fraud, slipped into financial circles like blood into water. Clients pulled accounts. His office lights burned late into the night, but no one trusted him anymore. I heard through an old colleague that investigators were already circling, combing through his deals. Arrogance had been his brand. Now it was Exhibit A. And Evelyn, proud, brittle Evelyn, couldn't face her own church. The same pew she had filled every Sunday for 40 years sat empty. Whispers followed her name down the aisle, pushed her daughter to betray her husband, skimmed for a house that wasn't hers. Faith communities forgive sins, but they do not easily forget hypocrisy. Meanwhile, I walked through the brownstone, papers in hand, deed reclaimed. The house felt different now. No longer a battlefield, no longer a prison, mine again. The wooden banister, worn smooth by decades of touch, seemed to fit my palm better. The creak of the third stair, the draft by the kitchen window. Flaws I once cursed now felt like loyal companions. I whispered into the empty hallway. Their laughter bought them comfort. My silence bought me freedom. Lisa visited soon after, carrying groceries in both arms like she always did. She stepped into the dining room, looked at the familiar chandelier, and smiled. Feels like home again. I nodded. For the first time in years, she ran her hand along the edge of the table, the same table where Linda once raised her glass to mock me. You reclaimed it, Justin. Not just the house, yourself. We shared coffee at that table, silence comfortable for once. She didn't need to say more, and I didn't need to explain. She had seen the evidence, heard the recordings, carried the weight of those years with me. She knew. Outside, the city adjusted quickly. Bookstores that once shelved me quietly now displayed my pen name in the front window. J.D. Rowan, 2.2 million copies sold. People I barely knew nodded on the street, some with respect, some with envy, all with recognition. Linda, on the other hand, shrank. I caught glimpses of her once in the parking lot of the grocery store, eyes downcast, rushing past, as if the ground might open beneath her. Another time near Cupley, where she ducked into a cab before I could say a word. The woman who once boasted in every room now couldn't stand the gaze of strangers. Tom stopped showing his face entirely. His office door bore a for lease sign by June. Evelyn retreated into silence. Her curtains drawn, her name whispered in pity rather than admiration. The neighbor, the silent witness to it all, stopped me on the sidewalk one morning. "I was there that Thanksgiving," they said softly. "I remember the way she laughed at you. I thought about it for years. Seeing you in court, it felt like the truth finally stood up for itself." I smiled faintly. It always does, eventually. We parted with a nod. Nothing more, but that nod meant more than any applause. Inside the house, I continued my rituals. The binder remained on the shelf, thick with pages of betrayal. Sometimes I pulled it down, not to reopen wounds, but to remind myself silence had power. Patience had won. Nights were different now. No more whiskey glasses lined up like soldiers, no more fridge hum mocking me. Instead, I sat at my desk, pen in hand, writing under the name that had always been mine, J.D. Rowan. And for the first time, I didn't write in secret. Boston thawed into spring, and with it, I breathed freely. Because when masks shatter, what's left is truth, and truth, once spoken aloud, never slips back into silence. May 2nd, 2022. The courthouse smelled faintly of paper and polish, the kind of sterile scent that belongs to places where lives are decided. I sat once more at the defendant Sept's table, binder at my side. Ethan leaned in, his voice calm. Today, the verdict. Across the aisle, Linda's pearl necklace trembled against her collarbone. Tom whispered something sharp in her ear, but his voice lacked confidence now. Evelyn stared straight ahead, hands clutched like prayer could still erase the evidence. The judge entered. The bailiff's voice called for silence, and then the words began. After review of the evidence, testimony, and financial records, this court finds in favor of Justin Miller. The words landed like a stone thrown into still water. Ripples spread. My chest rose. Slow, deliberate. The judge continued. Mr. Miller is awarded sole ownership of the royalties earned under the pen name J.D. Rowan. The royalties are deemed separate property, not marital assets, as they were established and managed independently prior to dissolution proceedings. Linda's head dropped, her hair falling across her face. Tom shifted in his seat, jaw clenched. The judge's voice pressed on. The marital home, purchased in 2003, shall remain under Mr. Miller's name. Claims of misrepresentation and financial misconduct by Mrs. Miller and Mr. Thomas Green are denied in full. Furthermore, Mr. Green is to be referred for investigation into attempted fraud and collusion. Tom's face drained. Evelyn muttered under her breath, a sound like a prayer breaking. The judge looked down once more. Mrs. Miller is entitled to token alimony, limited and temporary. Beyond this, no claims are granted. The gavel struck. This court is adjourned. For a moment, the room was silent. No applause, no cheers, just the sound of chairs scraping as people rose. Justice had not roared, it had whispered, and that whisper was enough. I gathered my binder, slid it into my bag, and stood. Linda wouldn't look at me. Tom hurried her out, Evelyn trailing behind, their footsteps frantic on the marble floor. The neighbor, once again in the gallery, caught my eye. They didn't smile, they didn't nod, they just looked steady, unflinching, as if to say, "You did it." Outside, the city moved as if nothing had changed. Cars honked, pedestrians hurried, a bus rumbled down Tremont Street, but for me, everything had shifted. I walked slowly, each step lighter than the last. Back at the brownstone, I unlocked the front door with the same brass key Linda had once tried to replace. The lock clicked smoothly. Inside, the air felt different. Free. I stood in the hallway and whispered. Justice didn't let it roar. It whispered, like the closing of a book. Lisa came that evening, carrying a bottle of wine. She hugged me tightly, eyes shining. "You did it, Justin. You really did it." "We did it," I corrected. "You believed in me when no one else did." We sat at the dining table, the same table where Linda once raised her glass to humiliate me. Now it held 2 glasses of wine, the light soft and warm. We didn't need to speak much. The silence was enough, but it was a different kind of silence. Not heavy, not cold, peaceful. Later that night, I went into the study. The binder sat on the shelf, thick with receipts, recordings, drafts, statements. I pulled it down, ran my hand across the cover, and set it back. It had done its work. Its weight no longer needed to rest on my shoulders. I opened my journal instead. On a clean page, I wrote May 2nd, 2022, the day justice whispered. Then I set the pen down and leaned back, letting the silence fill the room. Justice doesn't always arrive with trumpets or applause. Sometimes it arrives like dawn, slow, steady, inevitable, and when it does, you realize you never needed the roar. The whisper was enough. May 20th, 2022. The house was quiet, but for once the quiet didn't feel like judgment. It felt like peace. I sat in my study, the same desk where Linda once sneered at my unfinished drafts, and opened a small black microphone, the kind used for audiobook recordings. I leaned forward, script in hand, and began to read. My name is J.D. Rowan. The sound of my own voice startled me. For years I had hidden behind that name, tucked it away in contracts and royalty statements. Now, speaking it aloud felt like exhaling a truth I had carried too long. The room filled with my words. Not whispers this time, not muttered confessions in the dark. A steady narration. I recorded chapter after chapter of my latest novel, pausing only to sip water. The microphone caught everything. The tremor when my voice cracked, the calm when I steadied. I thought back to 2003, the day we signed the deed for this house. I remembered pawning my guitar to buy Linda's wedding ring. I remembered nights in 2011 when I nearly gave up. Rejection letters piled like snowdrifts. Every sacrifice, every insult, every sleepless night, they were all drafts, torn pages. But they had led me here to this moment where I could finally say I finished something. The irony wasn't lost on me. Linda had once mocked, "You've never finished anything in your life." Now here I was, recording not just a novel, but a confession, a testimony, a story that had begun in betrayal and ended in justice. After hours of recording, I sat back, eyes closed. The red light still glowed, waiting. I leaned forward again, voice softer. "You didn't lose me," I said, each word deliberate. "You gave me away." I let the silence that followed hang in the room. That was the ending. That was the truth. Later that evening, Lisa stopped by. She found me sitting at the desk, microphone off, binder still on the shelf. "How does it feel?" she asked, her voice gentle. "Like I've closed a book," I replied. She smiled, nodding. "Then it sets time to write a new one." We shared dinner in the kitchen, simple pasta, garlic bread, a bottle of red wine. No insults, no hidden agendas, no whispers through the walls, just laughter that didn't cut. Silence that didn't accuse. For the first time in years, I felt at home in my own house. After she left, I walked through each room slowly. The dining table where Linda once raised her glass. The living room where Tom smirked over false spreadsheets. The hallway where Evelyn whispered about keeping the house in the family. Each space held memories of betrayal, but they no longer stung. They were just shadows now, fading as I reclaimed the light. In the bedroom, I opened the drawer where I had once hidden rejection slips and sticky notes scrawled with numbers. I found the one with 8,200 circled, the first proof I had ever gathered. I held it between my fingers, then placed it gently into the binder. The beginning and the end, together at last. I sat on the edge of the bed listening. No fridge hum mocking me, no muffled voices plodding through the walls, only the steady rhythm of my own breathing. Justice had been served in court, but this was the deeper justice, the quiet reclaiming of self. I leaned back and closed my eyes. Every betrayal had been a draft, every insult a torn page. But this was my finished novel. October 2022. 6 months had passed since the gavel fell, yet the echo of that day still rang inside me, not as a wound but as a reminder. Autumn leaves flamed along the Charles, red and gold drifting across the water like pages torn from a book. Boston felt alive again. And so did I. I sat in a cafe near Copley Square, a steaming cup of coffee at my side, a folder of contracts on the table. Not divorce papers this time. A film deal, $1.8 million for adaptation rights. The producer across from me adjusted his glasses, excitement written across his face. Your story has legs, Mr. Rowan. The world needs to see it. I smiled faintly. Its set is already written. All that set was left is to share it. When I signed the contract, I thought of Linda for years. She dreamed of prestige, of being the wife of someone important. And yet when the moment came, she wasn't at my side. She was across the city, ducking her head in grocery store aisles, avoiding whispers that carried her name like a stain. I glimpsed her once, that summer. She walked past the brownstone as if it had turned to ash. Her posture was different. No pearls, no polished smiles, just a woman shrinking from the gaze of neighbors who once praised her. She didn't see me in the window, pen in hand, manuscript open, or maybe she did, and looking away was easier. Tom vanished almost entirely. His office shuttered, his reputation ruined. Evelyn retreated into quiet exile, her blinds drawn, her phone unanswered. They had written themselves into my downfall, but in the end they had only written their own. The city, however, wrote me differently now. Across the street from the cafe, a bookstore displayed a banner, J.D. Rowan, Bestseller of the Year. My books filled the windows stacked high, their covers gleaming in the autumn light. People stopped to look, some even stepping inside to buy copies. The neighbor, yes, the same one who had sat silently through every chapter of this story, passed by that morning. Their eyes caught mine through the cafe window. They paused, then nodded, a quiet acknowledgement that needed no words. They had seen the beginning, the humiliation at Thanksgiving, and now they witnessed the ending, silent witness to it all. I raised my coffee in a small salute. They smiled faintly, then walked on. That was enough. Back at the brownstone, I had reclaimed more than just walls and floors. I reclaimed life. I furnished the study with new shelves, filled them with books I had once been too ashamed to display. I kept the binder, the thick, heavy record of betrayal, on the top shelf, not as a wound but as a monument, proof that patience, silence, and truth had carried me through. Some nights I sat at the desk, lamp casting a warm glow, and flipped through it. The $8,200 hotel receipt, the spa folio, the co-author draft, the recordings. Each page had once been a dagger, now they were relics. Pages of a story I had survived. Lisa visited often. She sit at the kitchen table, sipping tea, smiling at the peace that now filled the house. It seemed strange, she said once. How quiet can feel so different. It used to be heavy. Now it feels earned. She was right. Silence had changed shape. It wasn't absence anymore. It was presence of truth, of justice, of self. One evening in late October, I walked past the bookstore again. Inside, a display showcased J.D. Rowan's complete works. A young man picked up a copy, flipping through pages with eager eyes. I lingered outside, listening to the city hum, and thought every story has an author. This one was mine. Linda would never read this epilogue. Neither would Tom nor Evelyn. They had written themselves out long before the final page. And that was the cruelest truth of all. They had wanted my name, my money, my story, but in the end they never even understood it. I returned home, climbed the brownstone steps, and unlocked the door. The key turned smoothly. No scratches, no resistance, no fear of intrusion inside. The house breathed with me, warm and steady. I walked through the hallway, past the dining table, into the study. On the desk lay my journal. I opened it to a blank page and wrote the epilogue they never read. Then I set down the pen, leaned back, and listened to the silence. Not heavy, not sharp, just whole. Because in the end, their downfall wasn't loud. It was quiet, inevitable, like the turning of a page. And in that quiet, I found myself again. April 2023. 1 year after the courtroom, Boston had thawed into spring again. Blossoms drifting along Commonwealth Avenue, tulips rising in neat rows. I walked the familiar brick sidewalks, binder under my arm, not because I needed it anymore, but because sometimes carrying the past reminds you of how far you've come. I had been invited to speak at a bookstore downtown, An author event under the banner J.D. Rowan. In conversation, rows of chairs filled the space, readers holding copies of my novels, eyes bright with expectation. For years I imagined this moment, and thought I'd feel like an imposter. But as I stepped onto the small stage, microphone in hand, I didn't feel like J.D. Rowan pretending. I felt like Justin Miller finally whole. I told them about the power of patience, about silence with teeth, about how every betrayal is just another torn page, and how torn pages can still make a book if you bind them carefully enough. They listened, not with pity, not with skepticism, but with respect. And when I finished, they applauded. Not the thunderous roar of a stadium, but the warm, steady applause of people who had seen truth and recognized it. Afterward, as I signed books, a young woman leaned forward. "Your words got me through a hard time," she whispered. "They reminded me not to give up." I smiled and wrote in her book, "Keep writing your story. Don't let anyone else hold the pen." When the event ended, I stepped outside. The neighbor was there, leaning against the bookstore window. Still silent, still watchful. They nodded once, the same way they had in the courtroom, on the sidewalk, across the cafe. A witness to my humiliation, my silence, and my rise. I nodded back. No words were needed. That evening, I returned to the brownstone. The house glowed with lamplight, warm against the spring dusk. I climbed the steps, unlocked the brass lock, and stepped inside. The study waited, shelves filled with books, the binder resting high above them. I opened the binder one last time. The receipts, the drafts, the recordings, all there intact. I touched each page, not with anger, but with gratitude. They had tried to bury me with these artifacts. Instead, I had built my monument. Then deliberately I closed the binder and placed it in a drawer. Not to destroy it. Never that, but to rest it. The story was finished. I sat at the desk, opened my journal, and wrote April 2023. Final chapter. I am the author, not the footnote. The silence in the house was different now. No mocking fridge hum, no whispered schemes through walls. Only the rhythm of the city outside, and the steady sound of my pen across paper. People often ask me if I regret the years wasted, the insults, the contempt, the nights without sleep. I don't, because every draft, every rejection, every betrayal was ink in the reservoir of my life. Without them, there would be no book, no justice, no final chapter. As I leaned back, I whispered the line that had carried me through. Every story has an author, and the truest revenge is this, making sure it sips you. I closed the journal, turned off the lamp, and let the room fade into darkness. For the first time in decades, I wasn't haunted by unfinished pages. My life was a finished novel, not perfect but true, and in that truth I found peace.